I want to turn next. I mentioned at the start of the show, telling you my topics for the day. I mentioned that AOC and Bernie and the revolution. I will tell you that this morning I went and listened to on YouTube. I went and listened to the warm-up speeches given at a Bernie Sanders rally in Los Angeles in December of this year. So it's of 2019. So just a few weeks ago, December 19th. And there were some clips I grabbed of what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had to say to this crowd. I'm going to ask Matt, the wonderful producer, to play them in just a moment, but I want to plant the seed. When Barack Obama ran for president, and he said within days before the election in November 2008, he said, we're just a few days away from fundamental transformation of America. A lot of people dismissed that language as kind of hyperbole, or how when you're making campaign speeches, you have to really be out there a little bit. You can't be boring. You have to be using catchy phrases. You have to be, really kind of jazzing up the crowd, energizing the crowd, and saying, making statements that maybe don't really mean anything, but they sound exciting for the crowd to react to. But obviously, what Barack Obama meant in 2008 when he said, we're just a few days away from fundamental transformation of America, he really meant it. He really meant the fundamental transformation of America away from the founding ideas of America. They had, within the first 2 years when the Democrats had the White House and the Senate and the House, we had, I think, what caught many people by surprise, the Democrats actually passed the first big bill on the way to socialized medicine. They passed Obamacare. They wanted to do a bigger bill, the complete takeover of the healthcare system. A little bit backtrack, weren't too sure how America would react to that, but they wove into the creation of Obamacare intentional pitfalls, intentional shortcomings, so that Obamacare was really, when passed at the time, was designed to fail. It was intended to be unworkable. It was intended to cause millions of Americans who weren't being forced into Obamacare. It forced them to change or lose their health insurance. It forced, in fact, at the time, even the architects of Obamacare recognized that the requirements they put in place in Obamacare would delegitimize, would actually make illegal a vast number of private health care insurance policies held in this country. It was intentionally designed to destroy the private healthcare industry, the health insurance industry. It was intended to fail. This is an example of what I mean. When Barack Obama told us he intended to fundamentally transform America, he meant it. He intended to vastly increase the dependency state, the size and number of people relying on the federal government for food stamps, for housing assistance, for welfare assistance. It was intended not just to be nice, it was intended to undermine that self-reliant, can-do American spirit that has been the core of the American identity, one of the core pieces of America's identity since our founding. He was intending to build the dependency class. He vastly increased the power of the federal government, the bureaucracies across the federal government under the control of Barack Obama, vastly increased the regulatory control over this country. It is why the EPA exploded in regulations, not just a number of regulations, but the scope, the intent, the depth, the purpose of federal regulation, intended to strangle private businesses, intended to take more and more control of the American economy into the hands of the federal government. Barack Obama intended to weaponize the federal government against the people. He intended to have the IRS undermine the conservatives in this country to stall the creation of Tea Parties and other organizations seeking 501c3 or 501c4 status. He intended to use the IRS as a weapon against those political people he viewed as his political enemies. He intended the gun running operation, the Fast and Furious operation, because it was intended ultimately to undermine the Second Amendment, undermine the notion of gun manufacturers in America being free to manufacture guns and sell them. He intended that harm to America's Second Amendment, that undermining the Second Amendment in Fast and Furious. He intended the weakening of America's military by engaging in a vast reduction in the amount of money spent on the military. And on top of that, a good word for it here, but the cluttering of the distortion of the mission of the American military to defend America. That's their primary mission, to be our defenders. So he introduced all sorts of social engineering and in terms of what he allowed or required in the military. And so we had to have a battle in the military over whether our tax dollars should pay for transgendering surgery for members of the military. He treated the military like it was a social experiment instead of the fighting force it was intended to be to keep this country safe. As you watch Barack Obama abroad, he intended to send a signal of American deference and American surrender to the United Nations, to the UN agenda, to the UN climate agenda. He intended to send the message to Islamic majority countries that America was not going to stand in their way. He worked on the Iranian deal, which resulted in empowering the mullahs in Iran, enabling them to develop nuclear weapons. Not that we are sure they did that, but the Iranian deal intended to allow the Iranians more free reign in their quest to develop nuclear weapons, while under the guise of pretending that the Iranian deal actually was going to stop the Iranians from getting nuclear weapons. We have Barack Obama bowing in submission to Islamic leaders around this world. And I'm making the point before I get to AOC and Bernie Sanders. When a leftist tells you they intend to fundamentally transform the country, as Barack Obama didn't even get to the notion of how much damage he did to race relations in this country, how much damage he did to marriage and the family and the intact family unit. When leftists tell you they're going to bring radical change, they mean it. Now I want to play for you what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had to say she was just a warm-up act to Bernie Sanders in Los Angeles in December 2019. Here is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
And California, are you all ready for the revolution? But I'm so thrilled to be here. I'm so thrilled to come to the heart of where we're going to change this country. Because what we're here to do and what this campaign is about, what this larger movement is about, is establishing a loving society in the United States of America. Because what a loving society is an advanced society. A just society, a loving society, is one that guarantees health care to all people. I want to ask you to wear out your shoes. I want to ask you to create art for this, to paper the streets for this, to give $10 for this, to knock on a door for this, to do whatever you can for this, because this is what revolution looks like.
Folks, I put the link to her speech on my website, americacanwetalk.org. And I hate to encourage you to listen to it, but I think you should, for the same reason that America should have taken stock, been more aware of what President Obama meant back in 2008 when he talked about fundamental transformation. In this short segment that you heard of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez introducing Bernie Sanders, she used the word revolution. She used the word revolution over and over and over and over in just introducing Bernie Sanders. She talked about revolution meaning, and for example, and she gave examples. It means free healthcare for everybody. It means free education for everybody. It means the Green New Deal. She talked about how Bernie Sanders is the only one committed to the whole Green New Deal, which, if you don't know yet, the whole Green New Deal has about 1% to do with the environment and 99% to do with the socialist / communist takeover of this country. It guarantees a job to everyone, guarantees decent housing. This is a complete takeover of the American government by the radical left. In this speech also, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez promised a radical realignment of our priorities. She criticized building our military back up. She criticized the idea that we are putting more money into making sure, in the era of Islamic aggression, of Iran threatening America, of Islamic countries, many of them causing instability around this world, she's arguing that it was a really bad sign about America that we actually want to increase our funding of our military. I want to say again, I think Bernie Sanders is a menacing threat to America. And he is actually, it is more than possible that he will win the Democrat primary. I understand that Biden is ahead. Biden is up right now. I think that, he's got so many Democrat voters who are saying, I'll take Biden because he's at least not a rabid socialist. I mean, he's like everybody, the Democrat voters saying everybody else on the stage in the Democrat debates is so crazy that I got to settle for Biden. I'm telling you, Bernie Sanders' numbers are going up. What he's proposing is going up. What you saw at that rally, if you watch the video, literally people hysterically excited, on their feet, clapping and cheering, and just, could not be more excited. I'll plant two last little points about this before I turn to my last story for today. Two last little points. AOC is very successful in conveying socialist / communist takeover of America as a means of expressing love. In fact, she used the expression over and over that she was quoting somebody else, but she got to the point of saying that real justice is love in society, or love is justice in society. She was trying to make the point that if you really believe in justice and you really believe in love, you must support Bernie Sanders and the radical left's agenda. She's selling communism as love. She's selling socialism as justice. She's working the crowd up into cheering her for arguing that turning to radical, big government controlled, massive wealth redistribution, massive taxation to pay for all sorts of new programs, that those decisions, those policies represent love and justice. That's what she is arguing, and the people were buying it. She also hit on the argument the left is making over and over and over again about racism. She's planting the seeds of racial tension, racial injustice. She is planting the seeds in the minds of people listening that America is a country rampant with racism. The only way you can possibly save America from the racism they are claiming exists, as this, out of control racism, is to vote for Bernie Sanders, who will somehow make it all right again. Folks, I'm not saying there's no racism in America. I'm saying the left uses the argument of it grotesquely embellishes and exaggerates the degree of the problem of racism in this country. And it uses the argument of racism. Leftists do, Bernie Sanders does, AOC does, uses the argument of racism to argue to the American people that they must vote for radical government-controlled society run by the leftists, that will somehow fix racism. I cannot urge you strongly enough to understand what they are arguing for. These are deep, serious, serious threats to America's well-being. Obama did a lot of harm to America in 8 years, and we've had a reprieve from the leftism, the government control society mission of the left under President Trump. But we're coming up on election in less than a year, and I'm telling you, the left is very, very determined to take back the leftist control of this country. And whether you have Bernie Sanders winning the campaign or some other leftist winning the campaign, you're having the minds of Americans filled with lies about America, lies about the goodness of America. In fact, she had a quote in there where she was saying, America is not a just society. We're very close to being a fascist society. This is actually what she is planting the seeds. And of course, Bernie Sanders comes on stage and says it all again. So this is a very serious segment and a very serious point. America better be awake to what the left is telling our people. We better be on board with the idea that it is a job not just of the candidates, not just of the elected officials. It's a job of everyday Americans in your everyday life to speak up for this country, to counter the lies of the left in your daily conversation, in your conversation with your friends, to point out that America is uniquely, extraordinarily the greatest country ever to bless this earth. Not perfect, but the greatest and most extraordinary country to bless this earth.